I was about to write my emulator's sound output to a WAV file, if only I could figure out what sample rate to use. A WAV file starts with a header. Because I'd only ever write mono 16-bit linear PCM, I could simplify the function to vary only sample rate and length. I added a helper function to write numbers to a file. Like the 6502, WAV files use little endian numbers, with the least significant byte at the lowest address. I wanted the function to be correct even on a big endian processor such as the PowerPC in all three mid-2000s consoles. I had it return the number of bytes that it managed to write. I wrote the header fields one after another. If something didn't get written, I'd detect that at the end. I decided writing one sample per 20 puts should be good enough. Back to put fields in the header. I checked what block alignment is supposed to mean. I started adding a command line option to write a WAV file next to the video memory output options. Or maybe 16 was a better divisor for downsampling. The file pointer for WAV output was another thing to free at the end, and not only free, but also finalize the length in the header. A preliminary header helps the file manager know what's being written. Windows depends more on file name extensions than Linux does. That's because Windows has a transparent storage hierarchy that goes all the way down to tape, as Raymond Chen described. Linux, by contrast, uses the header more often. After each few instructions, it checks for samples to write. I'd try to give it a bit less aliasing this time. A triangular filter smooths out the bumps in the square wave. It's not quite as sharp as a sync filter, but it's quick to make. It'll do for now. Division in C is biased, always truncating towards 0. I pushed each sample away from 0 to have it round to nearest. Then I could write the sample as a little endian number. I deleted the written samples from the core's audio output buffer. This formula was all kinds of wrong. I made it compile anyway. As a baseline, I reran my test ROM in the SDL front end. The headless front end crashed. I built it with debugging symbols to see where. One of the header fields was the wrong size. I fixed that and it at least didn't crash, but it wrote way too much data. I wasn't removing enough samples from the output buffer. I debounced the routine, doing nothing if downsampling wouldn't write at least 16 samples. I figured that'd help with cache friendliness. It was a start. I looked at the audio output in Audacity. Tomorrow I'd work on the PSG channels, pulse, triangle, and noise. Two of the 4 PSG channels are pulse waves. They can be used to simulate the horn this fellow is playing. I ran MD Fourier in this, and the length counters were expiring. It's not even supposed to use the length counter. I distinguished 2 ways it could expire and 1 way it couldn't. I logged the envelope setting. Turned out the CPU wasn't even setting it. I had it set envelope for all channels. Pulse would need sweep later on, so I added fields for that. There we go. The hold note setting made it in. I added fields for decay state and triangle's linear counter. The APU clocks the envelope 240 times a second. This clock is divided by the envelope decay period value. The triangle's envelope silences the channel when it expires. On pulse and noise, when the divider ticks, the volume decreases by 1. It starts at 15, which is full volume, and ends at 0. I made a function to clock a pulse channel and return its volume. The channel has a period divider that controls the note's pitch. Every time the period expires, it moves to the next step of a wave. Each pulse channel can be set to one of 4 widths, 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, or 3/4. This controls how wide the crest and trough parts of the wave are. The 1/8 pulse sounds sharp like an oboe, and the 1/2 sounds more mellow like a clarinet. The 1/4 pulse is somewhere in the middle, maybe like a saxophone. The width can vary over time, good for simulating horns like this fellow's fingerhole cornet. Period divider? Check. 8-step wave position? Check. I looked up the wave shape based on the position and width setting. When the wave shape is 0, the channel's output is 0. Another thing that silences a pulse channel is pitch sweep. If the current pitch is above 14 kHz, the channel is silenced to avoid feeding ultrasound into the RF modulator. Or if the sweep unit wants to take the note below 55 Hz, it considers the note over. Pulse treats the envelope setting either as a decay length or as the volume itself based on bit 4. I added the pulse channel's level to the mixer and made everything compile. Sometimes logging is like a rubber duck. If I can explain my reasoning to the duck, I might realize my mistake. I forgot to have the CPU write the period to the APU. As a side effect of setting the high byte of the pulse period, the APU resets the channel's wave position. This was probably to make notes punchier when they start, but it makes vibrato around some pitches harsher. MD Fourier was starting to play recognizable noises. I replicated Pulse 1's period high byte logic into Pulse 2. A sound driver is a part of a game that interacts with the APU. From 2009 to 2016, I wrote my own sound driver called Pentley. Pentley helped me find a typo. Triangle envelope was clobbering pulse envelope. I had both pulses, though they weren't perfect. I had the headless front end record a few seconds so I could look at the spectrogram in Audacity. You might notice that the whole recording is above the center line. That's DC offset. The NES APU doesn't do negative numbers. In the NES, a high-pass filter removes this direct current. I'll probably add that in a few days. At that point, to mute a channel for testing, I had to comment it out in the source code and recompile. I put that on my list to fix later as well. I was getting uneven pitch in part of the recording, but I was pleased with this first draft. The illustration is from a book of hours from the late 15th century. You can see the strings that he uses to hang his horn on his horns, so that he doesn't have to drag it while scooting on his hands and bottom. I think I'm growing fond of the guy. If you can think of a good name for him, let me know in the comments. I copied a pulse channel to make the triangle channel. The triangle wave is 32 positions long, 4 times as long as the pulse, and the period divider runs twice as fast to compensate a little. Decay on triangle has only one step, and instead of muting by going to 0, triangle mutes by holding the wave position steady and letting the high-pass filter sort it out. 4x NOR gates turn a wave position into a ramp down and up. I reread how the linear counter works and decided not to implement it in terms of pulse and noise envelopes. I wired up triangle to the APU registers, and noise too while I was at it. Unmuted the triangle and listened for the first time. It sounded kind of okay. It was at least good enough for me to start on noise. Noise shares the envelope with pulse, everything else is different. The period goes through a lookup table. The wave position is a 15-bit polynomial counter. The new bit shifted into the counter as the XOR of 2 bits, one of which is selectable to make either hiss or buzz sound. The lowest bit controls the waveform, subject to muting by the length counter. I unmuted the noise channel and made it compile. After a first listen, I needed to log the period and wave position. Unlike Game Boy noise, NES noise can unjam itself from an all-zero state. I could hear my drum kit loud and clear, including the hi-hat that alternates hiss and buzz every other frame. I listened to all channels at once, then recorded it to a wave. There was still one little imperfection making the pitch uneven. I looked at the recording in Audacity for 3 minutes. I gave up and started working on Pulse Sweep, translating the wiki page into pseudocode, and then pasted it into the program. Because more than one thing can change Sweep's target period, just like MMC1 and MMC3 program banks, I factored that out the same way, along with whether the sweep unit is muting the channel. Even if sweep is turned off, it can still mute the channel. A lot of games' sound drivers don't account for this and can't play notes in the lowest octave below A at 110 Hz. Sweep has a period divider, like envelope. Sweep updates the period if enabled and not muting the channel. Tomorrow I'll get to see if sweep did anything. I was about 2 weeks from the finish line on Hedgehog Day. Emulation of the parts of the NES I care about was feature complete. The rest was accuracy improvement and front-end work. I looked for all the things that could change the sweep target, such as writing to the pulse channel's current period. I needed to find ways to make testing changes less tedious. Recompiling to mute a channel won't cut it in the long term. Here I have the triangle soloed. Notice that 2 of the high notes start with the wiggles closer together, which reflects a higher pitch lasting about 2 frames. That's the drum hits interrupting the bass notes. You can see stair steps on the spectrogram at the left side of one of the notes. That's a kick drum. I had the spectrogram open to look for pitch inconsistencies. I found one. This step was just too fast this time. I found another. It was obviously losing samples somewhere. I logged the downsample routine. The loss pattern didn't nearly match the cadence of that. I correlated the loss pattern from Audacity with the log, and with the length of a frame in samples. I added a way to write samples at the full APU clock rate, bypassing the downsampler entirely. The artifacts were still there. I kept looking. I managed to get a range of sample counts where it happened and logged those sample counts. I had an idea what might be going on. It was capturing the audio only on read cycles and skipping capture on write cycles. I factored out ticking the APU and capturing the audio so that I could do that on write cycles too. Ran it again and no more visible skips in Audacity. I changed the output sample rate back and it sounded better. With that, I could remove some excess logging and unmute the rest of the channels, and it sounded squeaky clean. Maybe I could investigate buffer underruns in SDL, or maybe I could look up what accuracy coin was doing. It was freezing on one test near the end. What would it take to make the SDL2 front end use audio timing? That is, it'd wait for all of a frame samples to play out instead of waiting some number of milliseconds. It wasn't running full speed under sanitizer. I had to switch to optimizer. And that sounded squeaky clean too. Family size VM is now audio timed.